Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough, and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
Ron, I am so excited about our guest today, Tony Souder, because he speaks to a subject near and dear to your heart these days on the subject of grandparenting. And I know with my daughter just being married, I'm excited about grandkids. I'm not trying to rush them at all. So Hannah, if you're listening, no rush, babe. All in God's timing. But Ron, now that you are in the grandparenting season of life, I know you view everything through a different lens, but how has becoming a grandparent changed the way you think about discipleship? Or better yet, how would you have maybe parented different if you under the lens of being a grandparent now? What would you change if you could?
Yeah, I think without a doubt, there's one key area. I'm a bit OCD, and sometimes correction in our kids was of utmost importance. And now as I look at our grandkids, the little things that don't matter, they don't need correcting yet. Now, don't get me wrong. In our house, it's not like free reign, so it's not like, everything goes. But there are little things like, okay, she wants to explore the cupboards and pull everything out. I don't care. We've created one lockdown pan, little cupboard underneath there that has the liquids and things like that are dangerous. But if she wants to pull out pots and pans or Tupperware, she can pull it all out. We don't care. At the end of the day, she's not old enough to clean it up yet. I'll clean it up. It's part of the exploration, and we're good with that. And with our kids, there would have been an absolute no, this is not yours. Here's toys. And so, yeah, that's probably the big one right there. So it is very different for those areas. What have you seen? Let me flip it for you. I know you're neither one grandparents, and what you've observed out of your parents with your kids along this way, Marianne, that's especially for you. Josh, for how Lena's father and stepmom have interacted with your kids. The same thing. What have you noticed is different in their habits versus how your habits are? Give you the same question back in a different way.
I think my mom is similar to you. She's a remarkable grandmother, and took my son to Garth Brooks this year, the teenager, spends intentional time with them, which the interview, we're going to get into some of that. But I will tell you, she's so patient with my boys on things that she was never patient with me on. Yeah. I'm like, really? That's your response to him? No, chew him out for that, because you would have grounded me for that. And sometimes, but I'll tell you, my mother has worked very hard to be a voice in both my boys' lives, that sometimes Xander can only hear her and he can't hear us. She's the one that can talk sense into him, where I'm like, you better call your granny, because she's going to be able to give you some perspective here. So, I love that. But there are times that I'm like, you never would have done that with me.
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
Yes. I hear Lena share that all the time, that it reveals a different side of your parents. And I talked to my pastor about this, who is now a grandparent, and he just said, I'm having so much fun. He tells his grandson that his Jesus story, as Jim Wideman said, and talks to him about God. But at the end of the day, he goes, it's so much more fun. There's not near as much pressure, because ultimately it's, the responsibility lies with the parents. Yes, it takes a village, but there's a little more freedom involved when, hey, this ultimately how you turn out is not solely my responsibility, as that weight and pressure of being the primary parent holds. And I can't wait till the season of grandparenting comes along for me. I'm gonna be the cool grandpa. I'm gonna even try to get him to call me OG. What's your grandpa name, by the way, Ron?
It's Granddaddy. And
Granddaddy.
Our kids picked that out. I really had, went through a list. I'd really settled on one I really wanted. And it worked out to where our first granddaughter born, our son-in-law's dad and grandfather was always referred to as this name. Well, for our kids, they always had Granddaddy, and it didn't matter on either side of the family. They were both Granddaddy. Today, everybody has this distinct name. But for our kids, they wanted to keep what they had growing up. So I honored that and went along with that area. So that's it. What do you want to be called, Josh?
I'll go by whatever they call me. I tease Lena. I'm like, I'm going to be OG, original grandpa. And Hannah says she's going to get him to call me J-Dog.
J-Dog. I love
That's
it.
cute. That's
J-Dog.
Like, who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
Well,
my friends' kids call me Manny, Aunt Manny. It's kind of short for Marianne, Manny.
You've gone by worse.
That.
So
yes,
well,
guys, my last name. You remember?
That's right. That's right. Well, let's jump in and let's listen to the wisdom of Tony Souder. Tony's a friend. This guy has just been part of some remarkable movements in teen ministry. If you're not familiar, this is not where he's talking today, but let me throw an endorsement his way right now. When I'm out speaking and talking, he's one of 3 or 4 organizations I regularly, and I mean regularly, refer people to. The Pray For Me campaign fits perfectly under one of the family ministry models, which is adoptive, where people are warm, loving, nurturing adults are leaning into other kids' lives. But he's also in that season of grandfathering and grandparenting. And today we're going to get that overflow out of his life. And I'm so honored, Tony, you're part of our podcast today. Let's take a listen.
Registration for D6 2023 is now open. For a limited time, you can take advantage of the absolute best pricing for the D6 conference if you register now. The earlier you register, the more you save. Last year's conference sold out, so don't wait long to take advantage of this offer. Join us for the 2023 D6 conference, April 10th to 12th at the Marriott World Center in Orlando, Florida. This year's theme is All In, all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Register now at d6conference.com.
We are joined today by Tony Souder. Tony is the founder of the Pray For Me campaign and CEO of 100 Years, a family of ministries dedicated to helping individuals, families, and churches flourish in bringing the greatness of God to the next generation. He's the author of the Pray For Me prayer guides and lives in Chattanooga, Tennessee with his bride, Rhonda. Tony, thanks so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Casey.
I'm looking forward to this conversation because 13 years ago, my parents became grandparents and they changed as human beings. And so I'm looking forward to it because I love this topic. It's another layer of discipleship, as you know.
True.
Tell us about grandparents, maybe about your grandparents. Did they play a role in your life?
Yeah, they did definitely play a role in my life. Now, when I say they, it was really only my grandmother from my dad's side, because my mom's parents passed away early, and then my dad's father passed away early.
Okay.
And so I only knew my grandmother. Okay. But she was an amazing lady. And really, I have twin daughters because of her. The side story is that we can make a generational impact in a number of different ways. But my grandmother, when she passed away, she left us some stock, Potomac Electric Power Company stock, Pepco. So my wife and I had difficulty having children because she had a ruptured appendix when she was a child and scarred all her female organs, made it so she couldn't have children naturally. But we were able to. Our doctor said you can try in vitro. even though you get very disappointed. Mostly people come out without kids. I've already told you I have twins, so I've given you the punchline too early. In God's mercy, my grandmother, who left us some stock, was basically the amount of stock to do in vitro once. And so we look into our daughter's eyes because my grandmother's legacy, even though there was nothing overtly Christian in her life, so I don't know if she was a believer. But the fact is that my daughters are believers because of her. So there's legacy in a number of different ways.
Right. Oh, I love that story. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Can you talk about the difference that the relationship of the grandparent to the grandchild has in, the difference in the grandparent and grandchild relationship versus the parent-child relationship?
Well, there's the grandparent has less pressure. Game on for the parent.
Right.
But the grandparent, because of their place in the family, has a special place to be able to invest in and care for and love their grandchildren, in a unique way. And if they do that well, then there's a cherishing relationship from early stages for that grandchild. But one of the things that we found, so recently I wrote a prayer guide for grandparents.
Cool.
And in that we did probably hundreds of surveys and interviews with grandparents. And we found in that good grandparenting starts with good parenting. That if there's some glitch in how they followed Christ early on as parents, then there's distance a lot of times as grandparents, and things that need to be remedied a lot of times with their own children. But I may be getting ahead of myself with some of our other questions. But,
no, that's fine.
But they have a special and powerful and profound opportunity, let's say it that way, as a grandparent with less pressure. We always hear the joke, well, we get done with them, we give them back. But most of the time they just cherish the fact that they can actually invest in their lives.
Sure. So would you say that grandparents have an opportunity to play a part in discipleship of their grandkids?
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. A lot of that depends on how much that grandparent how closely that grandparent is walking with the Lord themselves, and how important feeling and tasting and seeing the freshness of Jesus in their own life, and that if the stronger that is, the stronger it'll be to want to be able to nurture that faith in their grandchildren through a number of different ways. And there's lots of ways that can happen. But yes,
how do how should parents and grandparents handle conflict? You talked about how the way that the grandparents parented often impacts how the grandparents are able then to impact their grandchildren. So how can they graciously maybe handle conflict when, they know they've messed up, but now they want to go back and maybe try to change some of that?
Right. I remember one interview we had with a grandparent and this came up in multiple times, but I remember specifically that grandparents need to be the quickest, fastest, and surest repenters on the planet, because they don't know how they've messed up. Maybe they do know how they messed up, but many times they don't know. They were doing the best they could. Mm-hmm. They weren't waking up. How can I mess up my children?
Right. Yeah.
so that they don't like me later.
Yeah.
They weren't doing that. That's not the case. But then another interview that I had with another couple, they said, we have to be open and honest with your children and ask them, where do you feel like we missed it? And so basically it creates vulnerability.
Yeah, what a good question to ask.
It is. And let them tell you what they think, because they're viewing the world differently than you were viewing the world at the time. And if they were hurt by things you had no idea of, then that's when you become the fastest, quickest, and most surest repenter, so that you can restore that relationship. Because they said at the end of this interview, they said, if you don't have the relationship, then you've just nixed any opportunity for further investment.
Oof, that's good. And so true, honestly. But what about a grandparent who's like, man, I really want to be involved in my grandkids' lives, in their discipleship. What's a word of encouragement that you have for them? How do they start?
Well, I would say, partly because prayer is such a big part of what happened in my own life and how we can make a difference. I would say if you're not praying for your grandchildren, realize that if you start praying for your grandchildren right now, you're sowing into the future. I mean, our prayers are future. I mean, either if we're praying right now for the present, now's over because it's all future. So whether we're praying for the next 10 minutes, the next 10 years, or the next 25 years, we're sowing into our grandchildren's lives, because prayer is rooted in God, and they can actually make a difference for generations to come by prayer, which isn't bound by geography or time. And so they can make a difference in their grandchildren's life, no matter how far apart they are geographically. And also whether their own children have said, no, you can't come and see your grandchildren.
That's
so
right.
if there's those relational snares, then they can still make a difference discipleship-wise in praying for their grandchildren. So that would be the first place to start.
That's great.
But then you also want to give as much quality time as you can possibly give, because there's something about the relational component that if those grandchildren are feeling the goodness of being with their grandparents, and I say it that way on purpose, because we can be grumpy old grandparents and we're going to get less visits.
Yeah.
So if more goodness we can help them to feel, then the more open they are to the truths of God that we're wanting to share with them and speak into their life discipleship-wise.
That's great. And we're talking about grandparents and discipling their grandchildren with Tony Souder. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Give your children and grandchildren a way to treasure your handwritten words with our new Generational Legacy Journal. About You, About Me, Generational Legacy Journal will guide you in telling your story while describing your kids or grandkids in ways that capture their hearts and leave an inspiring legacy. The left side pages tell your story, while the right side tells theirs, from the trivial to the powerful. Your child or grandchild will know each insight came from your experiences and observations about their life, their curiosities, their big milestones, and more, drawing them in to learn from your memories, insights, and encouragement. All the while, they will intentionally bump into Scripture and your faith values. Visit d6family.com to order your copy of this Generational Legacy Journal today.
All right, Tony, we are back. So in talking about grandparents impacting the discipleship of their grandkids, making sure they are able to leverage that relationship no matter where they are geographically. I love how you put that. For the parents, though, who are the parents of those grandchildren, how should they see the opportunity of relationship that their parents can have with their children?
Well, I would want them to see it. I mean, a lot of it we've already talked about, that there could be some relational snares there that could keep them from seeing it as an opportunity. But if all that's healthy or it's been mended, then what I would want them to see that their reinforcements, that we're not in this alone as parents, but we have our parents to care for our children, their grandchildren as well, to be able to affirm and help us to know that, help our grandchildren to know that what we're telling them is true. And so there's an affirmation, there's a joining together forces for that, for speaking into our children's lives. And so I would want them to say, hey, these are a valuable resource that we can naturally and winsomely take advantage of.
Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like a layering of discipleship, just like the partnership with church and home.
Right.
This is just an extension of that home aspect, is what it seems like the layering of discipleship.
It is. And what we don't want to happen is that for parents to feel like they're all alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's one of the reasons why the Pray For Me campaign exists. Anyways, is so that it's helping every child that is a part of any church or youth serving ministry to have 3 adults from different generations every year that are praying for them, so they're getting a wider and wider base of relationships. So that whole idea of bringing resources, relational resources, around every young person is, in its most basic context, is the family. And and as a parent, I want to be able to see, how can I bring the relational resources of my parents to be able to speak into and bless my children in ways that only they can do.
I feel like in the church, we segment a lot. So we have a nursery ministry, a preschool, a kids, a youth, even sometimes like a single adult or college ministry. Right. We might even have like an older adult ministry and call it something like that, right? Right. But we also might have an umbrella of family ministry, which I think typically when we think of family ministry, we're thinking of parents and children. Right. And we're not really thinking of aunts and uncles and cousins and grandparents. How do you think the church can play its part here? What part should the church play in equipping grandparents to make the biggest impact, not only on their adult now children, but their grandchildren as well?
Well, I think that one of the things the church needs to see is that grandparents are highly motivated. If they're strong believers and they've been mature in their faith, they're highly motivated to make a difference in their grandchildren's lives. So they've got wisdom, they've got time, talent, treasure, clout, and credibility that they can bring to the table. And the last thing we want is for them to kind of drift off into the sunset. We want them to feel like the psalmist in Psalm 71 that says, "From my youth you have taught me, and I still declare your mighty acts. Even when I'm old and gray, do not forsake me until I have one more opportunity to tell the emerging generation that you're great." Yeah. And so that's what we want the church to be able to see the grandparents and the older generations in our churches as a valuable resource for their time, talent, treasure, clout, wisdom, all the things that they can bring to the table, so that the next generation can taste and see that the Lord is good, because they've heard it from those that have tasted and seen that the Lord is good. Right. So that, I think that's one thing. The other thing is that they can, churches should take advantage of ministries like the Legacy Coalition. It's a grandparenting ministry. It's one of the largest in the country, if not the largest. But they have training that they can do. They have a Grandparenting Matters kind of training that's video driven, so that it can be done in churches to equip grandparents who haven't been thinking like the psalmist and haven't been thinking, oh, I can make a difference in my later years with my grandchildren and other children in the church. Because one of the things that in doing all these surveys and interviews with grandparents for 2 years, what I realize is that when I look out over the churches, over young people in churches, I used to look at, okay, here's the next generation. I just was thinking, but now I look at every one of these young people are the grandchildren of somebody. And so there's this generational connection that we need to tap into, because they are grandchildren, and those grandparents most likely are motivated at some level. Even my grandmother, who probably didn't know the Lord, but she loved us, and she wanted to make a difference in our lives, and it's generational, as we already mentioned from our history. Yeah,
and I think if the church is doing that, then we're not only equipping the grandparents who actually are grandparents, but maybe it's someone who is of, quote, grandparent age, who maybe they were never able to have children, or maybe their children were let me try that again, never able to have children. And so maybe they don't have grandkids yet, or maybe they never will.
Right.
Some of the people who have made the biggest impact in my life kind of adopted me as their grandchild because my grandparents didn't live close. So if we are then equipping everyone in that way and ministering to everyone in that way, then those people are taking other grandkids, of their own and making an impact as well.
Well, no doubt. There's a friend of mine who approached myself and my wife not too long ago and said, my father's passed away, my mother's still alive, but there's issues there. And we want our two sons to have some people that are speaking truth into their lives. And it gets me every time I think about it, that would you guys consider being like surrogate grandparents? And the answer was yes.
Of course, yeah.
Yes, we will do that. And so I go to their soccer games, and we're connecting at different levels. They have us over, and we're not saying that to the kids. We're not saying, "Hey, we're your surrogate grandparents or your adopted grandparents." We're just playing that role and starting to be present more, and so that at some point they may see us that way. And if we get the title, that's not our goal. Our goal is, and his goal was that we would be able to speak into their lives.
How can families utilize that Pray For Me prayer guide?
They can tap into, go to our website, get the resources. They can. There's several layers of Pray For Me. Campaign in itself is, if I'm a parent, then part of it is you're trying to, how do we build this constellation of adults around our kids that are praying for and praying God's favor over their lives.
Yeah. Even those surrogate grandparents too, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
even surrogate. Yeah, so that's one way. And then there's prayer guides for adults praying for students, adults praying for children. But the grandparent one, they would get that into their hands however they do that. And as a church, many of them, I got a call not too long ago for Grandparent Day, which is in September. They said, "Hey, I just want you to know," which I would not have known if they didn't tell me this, is that we bought your Grandparent Legacy Edition for every grandparent in our church. And we gave it to them for this day, really trying to stir in them something that maybe they haven't really realized, that they can make a difference right now, because God works supernaturally in ways that we don't even understand when we start praying. He does it in us, and he does it for the people in his life, whose lives we're praying, because that's his desire. He wants them to find their joy in him, and that's what we're praying for.
Yeah. Well, Tony, thank you so much for sharing today. Thanks for these insights, and I hope grandparents, parents, anyone who's around kids, we have this opportunity and layered discipleship, intergenerational discipleship, and so thank you for sharing your heart with us today.
It was a pleasure to be here, Casey. Thank you.
I shared this with Ron off the air. Tony is speaking about grandparenting in a different way. He brings some things to light that I really appreciate. And so just thank you for that interview. There was a lot of good, intriguing things for me to consider as an important part of grandparenting as a family ministry model and understanding that inside of the church. I really loved, so I would like to talk about with you, Josh. He talks about where to start, grandparenting, how to get that thing started, and how do you be a good grandparent. And he said one of the things he brought up was that sometimes grandparents can be grumpy in that grumpy stage of life, but that he called that out in grandparents out there to say, if you come at things as, grumpy and your will, your way, and that there's no other way, you're going to get less visits.
Yeah. And he's, I love when he said good grandparenting starts with good parenting.
Yeah.
It is generational, and I think that when, he had some very interesting, avenues and ways to connect grandparents in the church, because I was a part of a church that, I'll be honest, a lot of people that were in the grandparenting season of life felt like I've done my time. I have served the church. I am here to come to my Sunday school class, attend worship, and I'm going home. And I think that he shined a very much needed light in the area and importance of grandparenting ministry in a church, and the fact to affirm the wisdom, the experience, the credibility and clout and that they have as seasoned members of our congregations and churches, that they have something that they can give back to the next generation that it cannot give itself, that a first generation parent can't speak into their children. And me and my student pastor were just having this conversation this week that we are going to work on a list of cool grandpas to recruit for our middle school boys, because we want them. I think just the silver hair alone, a guy walking in like, hey, this dude's cool. He wants to hang out with us. And not only that, but balancing that influence that we have within the kids. You want, somebody that is younger to be able to connect and that speaks their language and understands, Clash of Clans and all their games and stuff. But you also need that sage who has experience in walking with the Lord a long time. And so we actually are making the grandpa draft that we're actually working on in our church for some of our middle school boys right now. So hearing this interview really helped affirm where my head is at this season of life anyhow.
In our ministry, the girls ministry that I did for a long, long time, we had a really special, and you guys have heard me share a little bit about this. We had a really special relationship with our senior adult ladies class. And I will never forget this as long as I live. I was getting ready for a girls' retreat for my girls, and I went to their class and I kind of casted a vision for them to pray about ways that they could invest in the girls and love on the girls. And these women got cards and stationery, wrote handwritten letters to each one of the girls. Now, it was pretty funny because when the girls opened their letters, they don't know how to read cursive. So they needed translation. But here was the coolest thing. Those ladies made special handmade pillowcases. They were all different. Wow. And so every teenage girl, when they got to the retreat, they opened up a prayer letter from this senior adult lady and a handmade special pillowcase from this woman who prayed and prepared this pillowcase for these girls. And I just thought, this is generational discipleship. What a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. One of the things that I hope that if you're listening and you are a grandparent, the one thing that we know is that we can keep improving. And the more we hear encouragement from people like Tony before we get to that season, the better we are. So there's probably people in your friendship circle that their son or daughter is, expecting, in their families. And I would encourage you to share this podcast with them. We have some previous podcasts on grandparenting, and we also have grandparenting as a theme inside the D6 conference. So I would hope that, like Josh is doing right now in ministry, Marianne's doing in ministry, get this kind of content so that people can start thinking, oh, I've never thought about it that way. I remember the first time I heard somebody say that grandparenting is not about candy and ice cream and all the free for all, but there's some intentionality because the kids will listen to you more than they do parents. And I'm just so thankful for that intentionality. Now, there was a question that Tony asked Marianne. You and I were talking in that same conversation earlier about getting vulnerable with your children. Do you want to open up that door and walk us in that?
Yes. So one of the things that he talks about is he begins to talk through parents and grandparents and conflict, which I loved. But he said, one of the best ways to help you become a better grandparent is be open with your children, your adult children, and ask them, and I quote, where did we miss it?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question.
Vulnerability, and let them tell you what they think. Own it and let there be restoration.
Wow, that's strong.
Yeah.
Powerful. Where did we miss it? And be willing to listen, because at the end of the day, that's going to reopen the doors of the relational equity. I like that term there, to restore relationship. And that begins to bring healing and makes the parent and the grandparent stronger and better.
I think that same logic applies all the way across the board in any relationships. Asking your kids, where do you feel like I've missed it? as a parent. You know, it's much easier to ask for feedback and to take that critical feedback when you ask for it. I think it's also probably much easier to give it when somebody's asking for it in that way, that they're both seeking reconciliation, they're both seeking restoration, they're both seeking, you know, to better the relationship. And most of the time we keep those things bottled up and we give that input when it's not asked for, and it can result in what we like to call moments of intense fellowship around our house. So I really appreciate that good word. You know, asking, where did I miss it? Because the truth is we all miss it. We all have missed it. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a good spot to land the plane in. I'm really excited about next week with Laura Petherbridge is going to be with us. I believe I'm pronouncing that correct. You know, talking about blended families and cohabitation and recovery and what the church can do to really change the trend of making those people groups feel a little isolated and how to include everyone in the church congregation. Well, until then, we're praying for you. We thank you for being a part of our D6 family, and we hope that these podcasts in this time serves to enrich and empower you in your walk, not only with Christ, but as a leader in the church, at your home. And we just thank you for being a part of our family.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.